This is Kelly Rich, and I'm here today with Kunal Sampat, the Clinical Operations Director from Ceribell and the host of the Clinical Trial Podcast. Kunal, could you introduce yourself to our guests and give us a little
Yes,
background?
sure. Thank you so much, Kelly, for having me on the show. As you said, I work at Ceribell as a clinical ops director, and Ceribell is an early stage startup company, and I also have a podcast where I host, where I talk about clinical operations and clinical trials. It's called the Clinical Trial Podcast, and my background is in engineering and computer science, so I'm very close to technology, and I love when people bring technology into clinical research, and I'm just excited to talk to you more about it today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Glad to be here too. No one would describe this year as typical. So, what have been your sort of key learnings this past year?
Sure. So, my learnings have obviously evolved quite a bit, and they're always changing as we go through COVID. But also aside from COVID, I feel one of the things that people in any industry and specifically in research need to do is I don't know if you saw there was data on from ACRP that showed that how many sites were going out of business, and I think my takeaway from that type of messaging from ACRP was if you don't adapt, you will die. So I think it's so critical for organizations of all sizes, not just sites, but also sponsors that have raised millions of dollars from venture capitalist companies, and you kind of have to make sure you're being a good steward of those finances. And how are you going to adapt your strategy so you can move fast in spite of all the challenges that you're facing, or the industry is facing in general because of COVID. And then the second thing I felt is like just owning my decisions. I think we all make mistakes. We're all human beings, and failure is part of what makes us better. And I think just owning my decisions has been a key part of this year's takeaway. And then finally, I feel like prioritizing my relationships has never been more important today than ever. I think living in this Zoom world where we're always talking virtually, can't attend conferences, can't have heart-to-heart conversations at a bar or at a restaurant, and I think just focusing on ways I can build my relationships and stay in touch with people is more critical than ever.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've felt that too. And I've also felt that it's almost easier sometimes, though, because people do a little bit have their guard down in this difficult time. So although we have to be creative, yeah, they've been at least open and willing. So you mentioned adaptability, or adapt and or die. Specifically in your role, how do you think that it has had to evolve this year?
So specifically in my role, just kind of trying to adapt and die. I feel like so let me give you an example. When we're doing site initiation visits
Mhm.
with clinical trial sites, one of the things that we've had in the past, we could just travel to the site and do these visits, right? And,
Yep.
and now you can't do that, or you're restricted in what you can and cannot do depending on what state the site is located. So if you're a sponsor, depending upon the how big the site is, like if it's the big hospitals in the country, like the Stanford Hospital or University of California, or the Harvards and so on, you may be restricted on what you can and cannot do. Versus smaller sites, you might be able to get in. So how are you go? So I've been thinking about like how can I creatively be able to do the site initiation trainings, especially when there was one site specifically I worked with right before COVID. So early March we had our visit, and now we're in October or September, yeah, and they're basically trying to get live, and they've already forgotten all the things that they learned. So how can I make sure that they're ready to enroll patients? So I've been thinking about how can I incorporate video in my training? How can I, create some training materials in advance that they can watch on demand rather than having to, get people to show up, like 20 people to show up on a Zoom call for an hour or even 30 minutes is next to impossible. So I've been thinking about like how creative ways on how I can engage with my sites.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Certainly, that's the space we're in, right? Asynchronous on demand to really help the sites who are obviously bearing a lot of the brunt of this, difficult time. So you've given us an opening there, but as if we switch and really pivot and talk more and more about technology, what do the sites need to address in order to successfully adapt during this time?
Yeah, so there's two things I feel. One is really understanding your workflow. I feel a lot of sites have no clarity on their workflow because they're just so busy, like doing all the work. I've actually interacted with a couple, like a big actually two big hospitals, in just in the last week. And I don't want to name the sites, but they are overwhelmed. They just have a lot going on in their plate, and the PIs are kind of disconnected because they have a clinical practice that they're trying to manage, and that's kind of their focus. But the research is also equally important for them, but they don't really have the time to work with the coordinator to figure out what is the ideal or optimized workflow. And I think just looking at, like, how are we going to engage with sponsors, and how are we going to do our trainings, and how are we going to do our monitoring visits, and how are we going to maintain internal communication with the IRB, uh, in a remote setting. But some of these coordinators that might still be remote or might not be coming in on a full-time basis, right? So how are we going to, what's our workflow in this new world, right? People might be furloughed, so how is that going to impact our
Right.
workflow? And then the second thing is investing in, like, technology and systems. And once you kind of know your workflow, then you kind of go and look for systems that will help you fill that gap. So I think those are the two things that can benefit sites greatly. Sites are just, they have a lot going on, and I feel like sponsors have a lot of the resources from a financial standpoint, and the site, there might be only a couple of people that are kind of trying to do everything, and that needs to change pretty quickly, I would say. Even though we have technology, but sites also need, resources to kind of get their work done.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking as you spoke, like, is it really fair to pose this question and focus on the sites and what they have to do? I mean, what do the rest of us have to do who depend so heavily on the site's success? Maybe you can speak to that. Obviously, the sites
Absolutely.
have many things to do, but what do the rest of us have to do to help them?
Absolutely. So as a sponsor or a CRO, I think you have a massive responsibility of, like, anytime you make a decision about anything, you want to think about, what can I do to reduce the site workload? I think we kind of feel like, yeah, we're going to pay the sites, X amount of dollars to enroll a patient, and we're going to pay them like $5,000, $10,000 in startup fee, and we just expect them to do everything. I'm actually working on a program where there is about, I would say, I think 16 vendors on this project, and there's one site. I mean, obviously, there's many sites in the trial, but there's one site working with 16 vendors. It's kind of overwhelming for the site. So, as a vendor, what are the things that you can do to make it easy for your site to work with you, right? So you could be a technology vendor, you could be just a CRO that's providing clinical trial or operation services, or you could be the sponsor. So one of the things you could do is create checklists, that will enable the site to kind of work with you much easily, and they kind of know what to expect from you as a vendor, and vice versa. And doing the same thing, like, from a workflow standpoint, like, how can you minimize the number of touch points with the site so that they don't get overwhelmed? And what are the things that you can do internally before that you can just say, hey, email the site and try to get all these action items completed. Email is a terrible tool to just manage all this, I feel, and we that's a completely different conversation. But I just feel like sponsors and CROs and any vendor is just like, hey, site, do this, and now enrollment isn't moving forward, sites are not getting activated in a timely manner, and then people will say, oh, because the sites didn't do their part. But what have you done as a sponsor or a CRO or a vendor to reduce the burden on the site? So really looking at that very critically is what I challenge the industry to do.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, we're all in this together and have a lot riding on all of these clinical trial programs moving forward. So those are good points. Thank you. You touched on it a little bit, but at the end of the day, we need patients, right? We need to enroll patients and we need to maintain patients. What have you tried that has worked in terms of maintaining recruitment as well as retention?
Yeah, so those strategies really, in my opinion, haven't changed. I was actually in a Facebook group just the other day, and I was just kind of seeing what the coordinators were talking about. And somebody asked, have you seen, like, issues with patient recruitment and engagement? And the answer was no. They are seeing patients come through the door, and patients want to want to participate in the trial because those diseases haven't gone away. They're still sick, or they still need help. Whatever the case might be, or they're just motivated to help, and be part of research. I feel like talking to sites periodically is essential. As a sponsor or a CRO, even though your sites might not be back because of into full full recruitment mode because of COVID, really keeping in touch with them is really critical. So I basically pick up the phone and start talking to them, on a weekly basis, and like asking them, how are they doing, what's new, how can we kind of keep things moving forward, and being front and center with them. Uh, Providing tools to sites is really important. So this is something like I used to do back when I was working at Abbott, and I feel like this is still valid. Like just giving sites a way to you know to engage with patients. So we created patient facing materials for the site, or we created like a little tracker for the sites to know when the follow-up visits for those patients will happen. So the site, some of the sites are not as sophisticated, so giving them the tools that will help them is really critical. And then thirdly, one of the things, my favorite strategies for patient recruitment is making the sites our hero, and getting them on webinars, such as the one, we're doing this podcasting as we speak, but scheduling like site-wide webinars, and then letting sites share their experience with other sites. Because if site A is looking for help, they know that you as a sponsor or a vendor can only help them to a certain extent. When it comes to getting the work done in the trenches with recruitment and engagement, it's only another site's experience is what's going to matter the most to them. So, kind of creating a formal setup where the sites can participate, and having a community around it, and letting them exchange information with each other, rather than you as a sponsor or CRO putting things down their throat, is not what's going to work. So those would be like the three things I feel like can definitely, I feel like have and will continue to help with patient recruitment and engagement.
Yeah, creating a shared community, I can imagine. Yeah, it really helps them feel like they're in it with others, and sharing the burden.
Yeah. And I think when you try to create that community, you want to again think about how can I reduce the workload for the site. You don't want them to like create all these slides for you so then they can go and present to another site. Like don't try to offload that responsibility to the site, but really like it's just something simple I've done is like I've created like a 3-slide presentation with 3 questions, and then I would basically get on a webinar and say, hey, site A, can you answer the first question? Can you answer the second question? Can you answer the third question? And then they'll just answer the questions, and make sure your questions are broad, so they can share important nuggets as they relate to patient recruitment and engagement, or just anything about operations.
Yeah, fleshing out those best practice nuggets that maybe some of your less experienced or less sophisticated sites wouldn't come up with on their own. But yeah, that's a great idea. Definitely. We've talked a lot already today about like all the common issues you're seeing at the different sites, but maybe you have like a specific scenario where you tried some things that maybe are new to our audience and had a good outcome. Do you have an example, like a specific example where you've worked through a challenge and been able to come out with a good outcome?
I feel like video technology is super powerful, just to communicate with people. I was working, this is not, this was like, I think right before the pandemic, but I think it would still work today, is we were trying to get, train sites on a clinical trial process, and like the way they should place the device on the patient's forehead, for example. So I just made a video explaining how to do it. And then we just put the video on Dropbox and then sent the link to the site. You can even put the video on Vimeo or YouTube and mark it as unlisted or private. There's ways to do that. And creating a video library for sites to then quickly like understand like how to do things, rather than trying to always explain things in words. As a clinical research industry, we've historically like put documents together, and with images and all this. I mean, images were like the next level, but now I think we're talking about video, and how can you incorporate video in your communication? It's just easy for the other person to visualize what you're trying to say. The documents are important, but those are more like for you to cover yourself up. I think people use that, but they don't really think about like videos. And I feel like the FDA would probably be open like to a video training. I mean, FDA themselves has a lot of video training on their website. So if people are concerned about like, hey, does video count as training? Of course it does, and you could train people through video. So I feel like I had success in just communicating with the site through video. I was talking to the PI, and then the PI forwarded the video to all the fellows and the residents, and then those fellows and residents could quickly get up to speed. And there's probably like 20, 30 people on their team. It's a waste of all their time to come on a call, and it's hard to coordinate these calls. So they could watch this on demand, and they knew that this tool existed. And then once you have the tool and you create these videos, I think you kind of need to think like a marketer. And how can you keep promoting those videos again and again, and making sure they remain front and center with your sites? You don't need to create a lot of tools, but as long as you create the right tools to bring them in front of your sites, it can be a huge help to them. So that's kind of what
Yeah,
I'd like to say.
absolutely. And especially you talked about when we opened up, just the stopping and starting that they've had to endure means that some of that information gets rusty for them, and having these tools that persist but are really accessible can, really, help them get the rust off when they get started back up. Yeah.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about technology and the pressures on sites, as well as the rest of the things that all of us need to do to reduce that burden. But that like sort of leads us wanting to kind of paint a picture of what do we see in the future for effective clinical operations? What is it going to look like, and how is it different than today?
Yeah, so I think some of the things that are going to, obviously technology continues to be a huge part of what we do, and it just is ramping up. I was just talking to a CEO of another tech company that's operating in the clinical trial space, and he said the pandemic has basically helped shrink the adoption of technology significantly. Like he said, things that we were like thinking 3 years down the road are now like 3 months,
Yeah.
because the adoption is the pandemic has forced people to adopt this technology, which is awesome. I think the next challenge is how can we get the technology tools to talk to each other. I feel like we shouldn't. I mean, this is like people are talking about this all the time. Is like not having to do manual work. So if technology can talk to each other, there's already as long as there's APIs that are open between tech vendors that allow for information to flow from one database or one company to another company, I think is going to be really critical to kind of bridge that gap. And then the second thing is I feel the evolution of the CRA role. The remote monitoring, the visits are going away, the site visits. So a lot of people are doing remote monitoring. But I just think that the CRA role is going to evolve and will continue to evolve quite rapidly. I think people are still stuck in this old CRA type of mindset of like going in-person monitoring and doing this and that you used to do. I think CRAs will have to be more technology savvy. They will have. It doesn't mean you're going to work harder. It just means you have to work differently, and that change is going to happen. I think one of the ways a CRA can be extremely successful in what they do is learning technology and really investing a few hours a week to learn how they can leverage technology to help their sites. So that's kind of how things are going to evolve, I feel.
Yeah, I think those are very good examples. Interconnectedness and automation would certainly help alleviate a lot of the burdens we've discussed today, because it would streamline, workflow, like you mentioned, and really let those sites and CRAs focus on those tasks that are most critical for their skill sets, and that can't be replaced by the technology. So I think those are all great points.
Yeah, and I just would like the EDC the data entry to just disappear. That's like,
Yeah.
We can't have our coordinators, do data entry by reading the source and then putting stuff in this database. It's such a waste of human power, and I would rather have those folks just enjoy life and do other things that are more important to the organization rather than spend all this time, duplicating information into another database. So I'm just
Yeah.
excited about that.
Well, let's spend a minute there then. I've spent a lot of time in that space actually, and have iterated on this where we continue to try to replace the data entry piece. But what do you think is the next biggest obstacle that's in the way of moving us more from whether it's eSource or EHR or those kinds of things? What's the next obstacle that would ramp up adoption?
So I know there's some companies that are doing like EMR to
Hmm.
EDC kind of link up, I guess.
Yep.
Like the study database will be linked directly to EMR. I think that's like a huge step forward. I think some of the big companies that are in the EDC space will have to maybe just tear their product apart and rebuild it. I feel like sometimes you just have to do that, and kind of see how can they change things to I'm probably not the best person to tell you like how that will
Sure, yeah.
happen, but I feel like that's an area where you know the obstacles are, it's a product that's getting sold to sponsors and CROs, so that product needs to change, right? So if
Mhm.
that product doesn't change, the sponsors are going to still keep using the same old EDC companies again and again. So we kind of can never get out of that. So I think there's a huge responsibility on the technology vendors to create a solution that will solve that issue rather than yeah, I think that's like the big barrier or the big next step, I would say.
Yeah, like you mentioned previously, when people kind of anchored how things were done in the past, I think a lot of those platforms anchor to the idea of they're there to support data entry. And so a lot of it looks and feels like a data entry tool. But really, if you change the paradigm and eliminate data entry, then the tool can look totally different, right? Like you said, they can tear it apart because they're no longer sort of held to this idea that data entry is what this is for. It's
Yeah.
really holding data and transposing data and transferring data. Anyway, I appreciate
Yeah.
you kind of diverging on that with me. So, Kunal, could you share with us some of the specific clinical operations nightmares that happened this year?
Sure. I think one of the challenges has been once you get your clinical trials completed, there's data that you get from your trials, and then you want to get that published, because if you don't get that data published, people are not going to really know what you did in the scientific community. Because at the end of that's kind of the goal of any clinical trials. Yeah, it's recruitment and getting a product approved and so on, but then you have to kind of help with the adoption of that product, or at least like educate other clinicians about what are the results that you got from your trial, so they can make an educated decision about whether or not this product is the right product for their patients. Obviously, I work in the medical device space, so there's a lot of competition, and there's competition everywhere. But I know in the med tech space, there's 10 different types of stents that a doctor could buy. So how do they know if stent A is better than stent B for their patient that's having a left main disease? So one of the things I feel has been hard to do with the pandemic is, or maybe just in general this year, is been trying to get papers accepted in a timely manner. There's delays with the reviewers because they are trying to they're also reacting to the pandemic, and they're busy with their families, or they haven't been able to all get into the same room to review papers together and actually brainstorm the merit of a research article. So I don't know if others are having similar challenges, but the timelines have been quite long to get feedback from the reviewers. And even when we get feedback, it's been hard to get challenge some of that feedback and get if they don't accept the research, then you kind of have to go to the next publication to get that approved. And I feel like it's hard for a lot of sponsor companies because they can't submit to two journal articles or two journals at the same time. Because if they did submit it to two journals, then if both of them accepted, then it would be a nightmare, right? You kind of want only one person to accept that. So I'm kind of still working through those kinks. I feel that that's been one of the challenges that's been ongoing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. With all the discussion of the challenges and the obstacles and the struggles of the year, can you share a specific success story with us?
Sure. I'm going to share a Ceribell success story, and I hope my CEO will be supportive here. But I feel like the company has done a great job of I think a lot of sites are having challenge, or a lot of sponsors having challenges with maintaining inventory, because if your production line has been closed, then you can't manufacture product, and you can't get product to send to clinical trial sites. And even if you send product to clinical trial sites, there's maybe quarantine requirements for the product that they have to be, at the hospital for 2 days before they can be put in a basket, or like in a box where the research staff can access the product. But fortunately, the manufacturing side has been amazing for Ceribell. And just kind of making sure the processes are in place to ramp up the inventory side of things. So if more patients need devices, then we have the devices. And I think also just planning inventory is extremely challenging. I used to work in the stent on stent trials before, and I remember there was a matrix, a size matrix for all these stents, and there were probably 16 different type of stent sizes that between permutation combination, and you have 80 sites. So, how do you stock all the product in the right levels at different sites when your production has been impacted? So I feel that's a huge challenge for a lot of people, and kind of I'm just amazed that Ceribell was able to kind of move that forward without any hiccups.
Yeah, good example. Thank you. Well, you've shared with us today clearly your love of this industry as well as your passion for clinical operations. And I think our audience would really benefit from maybe you sharing some of your favorite resources that help you stay up to date.
Sure. So I have nothing against like for-profit entities, but I feel, when you go to resources, I want like non-biased information as much as possible. And I'm not saying government information is non-biased, but I feel like that's how, our research is based. The FDA or any other agency around the world is the one that's going to approve your product, or approve your clinical trial design. And I feel my favorite resources to go to all the guidance documents that the FDA has, and they're constantly like publishing new guidance documents. I was looking at their COVID guidance document and how to do trials, and it was extremely clear. At least like, I know there's always things that you can improve on, but they had a good frequently asked questions. They were updating those frequently asked questions so people can kind of understand how to do certain things. I feel like a lot of the listeners that might be having questions on like what to do when, given the situation we're in. Can we do remote monitoring visits without a protocol amendment? Can we, see patients over the phone versus in person without a protocol amendment? Things like that, the FDA has clearly outlined in their guidance documents, and I'm just using that as one example. But now also there's a lot of technology, like we talked about in this podcast, where people are now more open to using technology in clinical research than they were before the pandemic. And there's a lot of guidance documents just on the use of software as a service in clinical trials. So definitely, I encourage people to look at the FDA guidance documents, and then. My second favorite resource is ACRP. So if you're a clinical ops person, you definitely want to sign up for the ACRP membership. They have a ton of free resources on their website. There's webinars that they do, and I highly encourage people to kind of engage with some of the materials that they put out. And they're a nonprofit, so that's another like reason I feel like they're there to solve a problem between private entities and the government, and they're kind of in the middle of that. So I feel like that's a great place to check out information that whenever you kind of feel like you're stuck.
I appreciate all of your insights today and taking the time to speak with us today. Where can people hear your podcast and find out more about Ceribell?
Sure. So the podcast, obviously, it's on, you can listen to it on pretty much all podcasting platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Android. My website is clinicaltrialpodcast.com, so it's pretty easy to remember. And you can go and there's show notes that I put on there, which are very easy to access. I try to make it as easy as possible for people to consume information. I know we all have limited hours in the day. So I try to help, through that point. And it's all free for people to look at and listen to. And for Ceribell, I would encourage people to, follow on LinkedIn. It's the name of the company, Ceribell, Ceribell, or visit Ceribell at ceribell.com. And I'm very proud to be part of that organization and working on that mission. So and I'd love for people to stay in touch. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. My username is Kunal Sampat. You can just find me on there. And keep engaging with other people, connect with other like-minded people, and do whatever it takes to help move this industry forward and the research forward. So I encourage people to do that.
Absolutely. I definitely think your love and commitment to that has come through today, and I look forward to future discussions.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Conversations in Clinical Trial Readiness. If you're interested in learning more about our team, head to our website, archimedics.com, or follow us on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us.